Ooh.
All right, welcome in. It's Candlestick Chronicles, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Chris Biderman. No Kyle Madsen tonight. He's being a big credentialed journalist over in Santa Clara at the Niners-Giants game. We're here to talk about it with Sam Esfandiari of Light Years. Of course, you know who he is in that wonderful Warriors podcast. He does some Niners stuff with us every now and again. But first, before we get to Sam, we are sponsored by Lamb Chops, SG Lamb Chops. .com. Go over and get your gear. I'm wearing a shirt right now. Their t-shirts are incredibly comfortable, great quality stuff. We're also brought to you by Cooperage and Cooperage Brewing. And we have a live event on Saturday, our third live event, 3 in 3 years now. And we're going to be drinking a bunch of Candlestick Chronicles Hazy IPA. Sam, have you ever had the Hazy IPA?
It's one of my favorites.
I love to hear that. Yeah, it's really good. It's not just a novelty beer. So go pick that up, cooperagebrewing.com, and order yourself a case if you are of age, 21 and up, obviously, and within the state of California. With that, we're going to talk Niners-Giants. Niners win. Let's get to it.
Yeah, I just want to say, big fan of Cooperage in the process. So
for sure, appreciate that.
Yeah, man. I just want to also throw this out there. Feels kind of weird not being the main host on a show here. I feel kind of like how Chris Paul's going to feel going to the Warriors. I'm used to kind of running the show. Now I got to be off ball. It's a little weird.
Yeah, no, you just got to just play your game, not turn the ball over. I think we'll be fine.
That's a nice dirty transition, right?
Yeah, exactly. I haven't been driving the show since like the first year, when Kyle and I were doing it way back in 2018. So it's a little bit weird for me to do intros too. But so the Niners win 30-12. And you look at just the pure numbers, and we were just alluding to this before we went live, but Niners outgained the Giants 441-150. They had 26 first down to 10 for the Giants. And, they convert 9 of 16 on third down. Great number. The numbers say, this is what we expected. The Niners are a Super Bowl contending team. The Giants have looked anything but the first 2 weeks of the season. But oddly enough, it felt like the offense played a C plus game, maybe, without Brandon Ayuk. And I would say pretty comfortably, maybe until that Brock Purdy touchdown to Deebo Samuel. That was Purdy's worst game since becoming starter. And he still threw for 310 yards and 2 touchdowns, no picks, 25 of 37. I think the numbers are probably misleading, but Sam, what was your overall take on the offense and what you saw out there tonight?
So first off, I think it's the second most yards he's thrown in a game in his career. So it is kind of funny because everything you said is true. And I think it's all about expectations. Yeah. This is the most talented team of the Kyle Shanahan era. We're kind of expecting blowout and destroy teams, particularly subpar team. Like the Giants are what, at best a 500 team. They're like a well-coached team where I'm not necessarily convinced they have talent. It's more just that they're well-coached. And so you expect the Niners to run into it and it to be 21-0 after the first quarter and it to be like a party vibe. And it was the opposite. They looked sluggish off the bat and they kind of just, slowly took over the game and adjusted. And I don't know. Everything's all about expectations because I think they had full control of that game basically from the middle of the second quarter on, but it was, first drive down the field, can't score in the red zone, second drive, punt, third, kind of some struggles in the first, let's call it quarter and a half of the game. And that just sits in your mouth the whole time. Sometimes it just makes you lose focus of the fact that end of the day, they put up 30 and they did exactly what you expected. And if Deebo scored on the first drive like that, and it's the opposite way, they get off to a hot start and then they just play with their food, you're walking away feeling way different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something to, there are a few factors at play, right? Thursday night games generally are just pretty ugly, right? I think that it was a pretty ugly, disjointed game. The Giants blitzed seemingly every play. And Brock Purdy had been good against the blitz, but I think throughout his time as starter, But obviously, this is the first game Brock Purdy's played without Brandon Ayuk, who I think is pretty clearly right now the 49ers' best receiver when it comes to just beating man coverage. And that's ultimately how we're talking about it with in the other group chat with our buddy Nick Wagner, who's getting his shout out per episode right here. But we're talking about it that the offense just clearly misses Ayuk, and Ayuk's probably their best receiver. He was their leading receiver last year, but tonight with his absence, it really felt like this is a team that was missing its number one receiver. And as talented as all the skill position guys are that the Niners have, it was kind of glaring. And so, I don't know that I'm coming away from this game. Like, I think Brock Purdy would have to have a game where he like threw a bunch of picks, and he threw a lot of interceptable passes. But I would need to see
isn't
Brock
that the
Purdy.
Funny thing, because it's like he took care of the ball just by virtue of the fact he didn't throw any picks, but it did feel like there were some wild passes in there.
I think I counted 4 passes just on the first drive that felt like they could have got picked. And Nick tweeted this out: Brock Purdy against the blitz in the first half tonight, 9 of 16, 5.8 yards per attempt. In the second half against the blitz, 8 of 11, 13 yards per attempt with the touchdown to Samuel. And he stared down the barrel on a blitz on the Ronnie Bell touchdown too. What do you need to see, or where are you at on Purdy? I guess I haven't talked to you specifically about Purdy and just how sold you are in terms of him being a guy that you could potentially win a Super Bowl with.
I'm actually personally pretty sold. And I might be jumping the shark on it a little bit, but like, if you take a step back, today's game's exactly what you want to see. The Giants brought more pressure than he's probably seen on a consistent basis in any other game he's played, short of the Philly game, which he played a half a quarter. So that doesn't really count. And yeah, it frustrated him early on, and he adjusted to it. Like, part of it was Kyle Shanahan just kind of like, let's throw a bunch of screen passes. Let's let you get comfortable. Let's kind of make them respect us, going wide with the screen, that sort of thing. And the other part of it was just him adjusting, which I think is honestly his strongest skill set at this point. Like, he doesn't have Pat Mahomes' arm. No one's going to like mistake him for Josh Allen with the deep ball. The thing he does that consistently impresses me is he's really quick at reacting to the way the defense plays him. And one of those ways is like, avoiding a sack and making kind of a play when you're on the move. Another is, all right, they're bringing a lot of pressure to me in the first quarter, and by the third quarter, I feel a little more comfortable with it, and the offense gets going a little more. And that's how tonight felt to me with him. He felt something he probably hadn't felt in either of the games earlier this season or most of the games he started last year, and he adjusted to it over time. And it wasn't like when you think about it, like, adjusting mid-game, that's what matters for a quarterback more than anything.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I thought your Light Years co-host Andy Liu had an excellent tweet tonight, just talking about, like, he doesn't really care about what it looks like or what it looked like in the game. It was just like Brock Purdy's vibes are just excellent.
Yeah,
and I think his poise and just his calm that he just plays with. It's not even about like, his demeanor in the huddle or his leadership skills or anything like that. He just exudes a calmness. And when he knows he's going to get hit, he doesn't freak out and he still delivers the throw. And you see that over and over again. I think that's probably the most impressive thing, in my opinion, that he's done early on in the season. And my concern with Brock Purdy has less to do with Brock Purdy. And I've said this before on the pod, but like, I'm more concerned about the right side of the offensive line and can it hold up and keep Brock Purdy healthy. Because he's not the biggest guy. And we see, time and time again, defensive linemen getting close to that right arm and that surgically repaired elbow. And there wasn't any like one play tonight that really stuck out to me in that regard. But it just feels like when I watch Brock Purdy, that's the thing I worry about the most from the Niners' perspective. It's not, can you win with him? Because obviously they never lost with him in a game that he started and finished. And he can clearly run the offense, and with all the weapons there, they can score plenty of points. But man, Spencer Burford didn't look good. You didn't feel great about Colton McKivitz. The Giants defense is not that good. They didn't have a sack coming into tonight, and I think they had 2. And they were just really disruptive, particularly in the first half before the 49ers adjusted. I'm worried about the 49ers right side of the offensive line being kind of an Achilles heel at this point.
I mean, I would disagree with you. It's
Really?
clearly the weakest part of the team. That, or I don't know, maybe some DB play leaves a little to be desired. Definitely inconsistent, although they've had some moments on the season, more so than the right side of the line has anyway.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it comes back to. I guess it comes back to Shanahan more than anything. You saw like his counter to them blitzing was like, I'm going to run the ball more and throw a bunch of screen passes to kind of not put Brock in situations where he has to make decisions he's not comfortable making. And in the Niners case, they have the players to do that. Like most teams would kill to have one of McCaffrey or Debo. They have two guys who,
Right.
can play that type of role. Then you got George Kittle, who I think looking for him in the second half, I think actually probably opened up Debo a little more. They hadn't really looked for Kittle much in the first two games. And some of that's just kind of like, they have a lot of weapons. He can be like a nice fourth option for them. And like, it's nice, but yeah, I mean, to your point, if you want to pick on a weakness, it's that. And when they play against a Dallas Cowboys or a Philadelphia Eagles, like, they're going to put their best pass rushers on that side and try to pick on the Niners that way. And when they do play against those better teams, like, it's probably going to look more like this. It's going to be a grinded out game where it's like, he's not dropping back. Like, one, he's not Pat Mahomes. You're not trying to have him scramble around, throw it 60 yards down the field. But on the flip side, the best way to protect your offensive line is a bunch of quick hitting plays, whether it's a running play or a quick slant. And I just kind of think that's who they are. I don't know how else to put it. I just think no team's perfect. We focus on the quarterback, but like the right side of the line's just as big a part of that. It's like, yes, that's kind of what happens when you have the best left tackle, the best running back, high priced tight end, wide receiver, defensive players. Like, there is some give and take.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought George Kittle early in the game, you mentioned the tight end. The first few weeks of the season, I've been wondering if the groin injury was bothering him because he hasn't really been able to separate and be that guy who can beat coverage like he did so regularly earlier in his career. But he finishes with 7 catches and 90 yards. Obviously, a bunch of that came in the second half. But your guy, Ronnie Bell, coming in with 2 catches.
Mini Debo?
Debo, yeah. The touchdown catch, obviously pretty impressive, and a good throw by Purdy. We mentioned earlier, probably it felt like his first like good one in that game.
Yeah, that was the first one where I'm like, okay, we can calm down because it'd been kind of skittish up till that point.
Yeah, and then he got lucky, Ronnie Bell, with I forget who the pass was. It was over the middle, it was deflected in the air, and he was able to get it, come down with it. But I think the more important takeaway, just then, like the fact that you got 2 catches and a touchdown, is like Ronnie Bell looks playable. And when you can have a guy who's your 5th receiver who can contribute, like we saw him make a really nice tackle on special teams, and then come in and fill a role on offense while you're missing your best receiver, or one of your best receivers, arguably. That could prove pretty big for the 49ers down the road. I think that's one of the early season developments that you like to see, but I think you have some thoughts on Ronnie Bell.
Doesn't he just look like a Niners player to you? Doesn't he not look like a Shanahan player to you? Like, I made the mini Debo thing in jest because like I legitimately think Debo's just one of one. Like, I can't think of any player in NFL history who's comparable to him. Like, remember when like Marshall Faulk and like all the like running backs who are wide receivers are like, well, this is kind of wild. I didn't really think you'd ever see a wide receiver could go the other way with it. But anyway, I'm digressing. That's a different conversation. That's one that's been had many times over.
Sure.
When I watch Ronnie Bell, it's the same thing. I see a guy who likes to play through contact and who's versatile. He's, what is he, 5'10"? He definitely
not
feels
big. It's not big.
He's kind of built like a running back. Maybe that's the whole thing. It's like just play running backs at wide. Ayuk is the only wide receiver on the roster in some ways, in my
Right.
opinion.
Even Juwan Jennings was like a quarterback
Mm-hmm.
in high school, and even played some quarterback in college. So
and like, whether he's always this way or he's bought into it, he seems very into like blocking and laying people out, the same way the other guys do. But yeah, no, Ronnie Bell looks like a guy who can absolutely contribute to this team, more so than he did tonight. To your point, it's hard to find guys who can make a play on special teams defensively, like tackling, and also catch a touchdown, and also maybe lay a key block and do those sort of things. It kind of ties to the defining ethos of this team, which is like versatile skill position players.
Yeah, and speaking of, I think we have to give a nod to Christian McCaffrey, who I just like, if he would have made that catch, that back shoulder catch, I think it was in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
It would have been like, okay, this like another phenomenal game for him. It was a good game, but like had he come down with that one, it just would have been sort of the cherry on top. I don't know, man. Like I was very dubious of the Christian McCaffrey thing when it happened, just from the standpoint of like what they invested in him. And
it didn't feel like a little duplicitous. Like, do you really need that type of, like, you already have Deebo Samuel. You run the ball well with Elijah Mitchell. Like, this doesn't feel like the biggest need on your team.
But now he seems like the most important skill guy they have this year.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't seem particularly close, because like when the passing game is struggling, you can still go get 5-6 yards of carry. And he had 85 yards without busting out one of the big ones like he did in the first two games. But I don't know, man. It's really remarkable what he does for the offense just overall, and how everything just feels a little bit unlocked, because I don't think this win streak, they're at 14 straight regular season games now that they've won, something like that. Like, it doesn't feel possible.
9 or 10 with Brock. So
it doesn't feel possible without McCaffrey and everything they've gotten from him. And so far, like, this trade continues to look like a home run, even though they did give up a pretty penny and they are paying him a lot. But like, man, for a team with Super Bowl aspirations that runs the ball as much as they do, like, McCaffrey just, I don't know. What do you think of, like, I mean, he did get 18 carries, and Kyle Shanahan actually took him out of the game late in the fourth quarter today.
Two thoughts. One, I felt like he didn't play as much as he did the last 2 weeks, and I'm looking at the box score and I'm seeing 18 carries and 5 receptions, so 23 touches, which is right on par with what he's done the last couple of weeks.
He played 100% of this. He played 100% of the snaps in LA last week, or Sunday,
and 119 yards, which somehow is the least he's had in a game so far, which just speaks to how good a season's been. There's that, but to me, it's, I mean, between him, Deebo, them running just the general 21 package where you have like 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and a tight end, and every one of them being able to play any position. Like, how many different times have you watched them come break the huddle and it's Deebo in the backfield and McCaffrey, wide as a receiver? And you have to honor it because he's that good as a receiver, and Deebo's obviously that good as a running back. And I don't know how much of that was like, they saw that as like the master plan at the trade time, but I can't think of a team who's ever had that level of versatility in their ability to line up, and they take advantage of it. And it's, in some ways, it feels like a multiplier effect where it's like look, we all know Christian McCaffrey is one of the best running backs in the league. And he's a versatile offensive weapon, almost just as good out of the backfield catching the ball as he is running it. And, say the same thing about Deebo, but seeing someone like Shanahan be able to like really take advantage of that and kind of misdirect the defense the way they do it. I'm going to be honest, I didn't see that coming in that level of production. And then that's kind of where just like having a quarterback who's quick probably helps the whole thing more than anything.
Yeah, we said it at the time. I think like for this trade to really be successful, it has to impact the passing game. It just has to. Like they've been able to run the ball. They went to a Super Bowl, well before they got Christian McCaffrey. But he caught all 5 of his targets tonight and only had 34 yards. Actually, that stat can't be right because he dropped that was an incompletion, the one in the end zone. So the box score, NFL box score, they got to clean it up. But anyway, like it just feels like he's the best security blanket in the league. And
Yeah.
I have to think that like what Brock Purdy's been doing from a production standpoint, and even Jimmy Garoppolo after the trade last year before he got hurt, it feels like he wouldn't have been able to play at that high of a level without having McCaffrey there. Not only as somebody that the defense has to honor in the running game and play action and all of those things, but just like the type of matchup nightmare he is for linebackers and even DBs for like that stiff arm. I know this was a running play, but that stiff arm where he just basically like pushed the rookie DB from the Giants back like 8 yards. I mean, the guy's really fast and really shifty, but like I'm starting to think his strength just and his power overall might be underrated a little bit. I don't know. I'm just more impressed with him. I think as time goes on, I just keep getting more and more impressed.
It is one of those things where it's like, I knew he was good. Like, look, we're both in Northern California. We watched him at Stanford. He's been that dude, as long as I've been aware of who he is as a football player. But it's still different watching it. When he's in Niners jersey at this level, I'm like, oh no, he's the best player on the field right now, which is just like the highest praise you can kind of play to a football player. I want to ask you this. Mm-hmm. I want to take this in a different conversation. I'm scrolling my timeline right now, and we got
always a good idea.
Well, it might as well get spicy. So you got PFF Sam Monsoon going. Brock Purdy has never lost a regular season game, and we still have no idea if he's any good. Kyle Shanahan is an absolute magician. I'll drop it in the chat if you want to put it on the screen.
Yeah.
I don't know. I understand the sentiment behind it because the sentiment is this. I don't think there's an offense with more skill talent than the Niners, or right. If there is, they're in the top, whatever. Right. And obviously Kyle Shanahan's proven one of the best play callers in the league, period. But I still think it kind of undersells Brock here in general. And I never really know. I never really know how to quantify his impact other than, look, man, I know what this offense looked like when Jimmy was running it. I know what it's looked like with other quarterbacks. If your argument is he's not making hero ball plays, like, sure. Like, but is that really the measure of an effective quarterback?
Right. It's like, yeah, Joe Montana won a bunch of Super Bowls, but we really don't know if he's any good because he was with Bill Walsh and had Jerry Rice.
Sure.
Right.
pretty much. Yeah. That's like the high level point of it. It's like, let me see him sling it in some backyard football to prove he can really make the play. Right.
Yeah. I just,
it feels like more, by the way, of like this is such an NBA discourse bullshit, like where it's just like, Clint Thompson's good, but like he can't really create on his own, and blah, blah, this Zach LaVine's a better player, and I'm like, at what? At doing what? Is the point to win the game, or is the point to put up highlights?
Right. Everybody has a role on the team, and sure. Yeah, I just with this stuff, like I think the point here is though that we can take away from it is he throws to a lot of open receivers.
Sure.
And that's a function of Kyle Shanahan, but it's also a function of being able to identify the right place to go with the football.
Yeah.
I mean, that's important. He's not putting the ball in harm's way generally. Before tonight, like tonight, it felt like, and I'm sure
there's a couple tonight.
Yeah, this number will come out, but it felt like there were like 5 or 6 like interceptable passes, particularly early in the game. And maybe that's just a function of, again, it being Thursday night and them not really being prepared for that much blitzing. But
missing their one receiver who stretches the defense just with his route running. Like that's the other thing. Like I think Debo is more valuable and more important to them than Ayuk, but like Ayuk is very important to everything they do because he's the only receiver who literally can pull a safety deep.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think like it's just hard to divorce the player from the circumstance. And I don't think it's necessarily fair because we don't necessarily need to. Like, why do we need to know what Brock Purdy looks like without Kyle Shanahan? to evaluate him, right? Like everybody knows.
See what he
that,
can do with Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney or whatever. Like,
but everybody knows that a quarterback in a bad situation is more likely to fail than a quarterback in a good situation. So it's like reductive to be like, oh, we don't know anything about this guy. Well, it's like, are they scoring? Is he playing well? Like he came into this week tied for first in the NFL in QBR, depending on how you feel about QBR. I mean, I don't think it's an everything stat, but I think it says a decent amount about a player or about a quarterback.
It means he's playing very productive football. Like at minimum, QBR says your offense is moving at a very efficient rate.
Right.
When this guy's in there, you guys are doing better than most quarterbacks. So yeah.
Right. And like he had to rely more on screen passes tonight.
Sure.
He had, I'm sure his average depth of target is going to be the lowest of his career to date. And all that stuff is going to be true. But like, do we need to know what Brock Purdy looks like divorced from this situation? I don't think so. Like, that's like somebody trying to go into your world, like criticize Draymond Green. It's like, well, he has Steph. It's like, okay, right.
Sure.
He has Steph, but he also like Steph benefits from him. I would argue in not quite the same way that Draymond benefits from Steph, but it's a pretty symbiotic relationship, and I don't find it like helpful at all to try to evaluate that player divorced from their situation.
And to your point, like you opened the conversation talking about how they were missing Ayuk.
Yeah.
Factual statement. Just in terms of like depth per target, he's the receiver who gets deepest down the field before it's thrown to him. He's clearly the best route runner on the team. He's the only receiver they have who probably engages the safety down the field before he gets a ball thrown to him. Like Debo is honestly probably my favorite skill position player I've ever seen because of just how like physical he is playing football. But like, that's the beauty of Debo. He gets a ball at the line of scrimmage and he runs through everyone, right? Like he's not a player who, although he did have a play today with the touchdown, he's not a player who traditionally is catching the ball 20 yards down the field. And to your point, what does a quarterback with a bigger arm look like when he doesn't have Ayuk and their weapons are McCaffrey, Debo, Kittle? He's probably doing the same thing that Brock Purdy did tonight, maybe with a little like more zip on the ball. Like that's really it.
That's true. That's
like,
true.
They're not getting Debo down the field in one-on-one matchups as if he's Jamar Chase. Like that's not his game, right? And so when you say you can't divorce the player from the situation, it goes both ways. I don't know what Brock Purdy would look like if he had wide receivers like Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. He doesn't. So he's always going to look like kind of a underneath dink and dunk passer with the weapons they have.
Yeah,
is what it is.
Debo, to your point, and we should talk about him a little bit. That play, what was it, the 40-yarder where he broke 4 tackles? I mean, that was
How many tackles did he break today, by the way? Like, I think he had like, that was the big one, but he had 3 other ones where I'm like, I thought he was going to house them, and it just turned into like 4 guys' ankles being broken.
There was a lot of hype coming into the season about Debo being in great shape and, being voted a team captain and all of that stuff. In the first 2 games, like Debo obviously, didn't look terrible, but he didn't really break out from a number standpoint. Sure. This looked like 2021 Debo. Like he only caught half of his targets. He was targeted 12 times. He had just 6 catches, but he had 129 yards in that back shoulder touchdown, which was a dot from Purdy. But this looked like 2021 Debo. If they're going to get 2021 Debo in addition to Ayuk, if he returns and was playing like he did, NFC offensive player of the week in the opener, I mean, they're going to be extremely difficult to stop because Samuel looked excellent tonight.
And I mean, my whole thing with him is his game translates to the playoffs. Like he's tough, dude. You see a lot of guys who are excellent route runners, destroy bad defenses, and then you get against a good defense. And it's not even about the route running that the issue is. It's just the pressures on the quarterback, and all of a sudden they're not throwing balls to him as much. The pressure doesn't really matter with Debo. You just throw it to him and let him make a play type of thing. I agree with you. He looked like the dude who ran through the Rams and the Packers in that kind of improbable playoff run when like they were a mess up until the playoffs in some ways 2 years ago, including, thinking he was seriously injured for a moment there.
Yeah.
And then you look, I'm like, he's tired. And then, he goes onto the sideline, he's back in 2 plays, that type of thing. Like, I don't know. You tell me who you would rather have in the playoffs, that guy or someone who's thrown up fantasy points. I'm not going to name names on receivers, but like there's an abundance of guys who I'm like, I don't know, man, you get a little rough with them and the pass rush gets a little worse. And I don't notice them in the game at the same level I do Debo.
Yeah. And to your point about like that Packers game, you remember in Lambeau, he's like, he twisted his ankle. I think he got like destroyed over the middle at one point in that game. And then it was like 3rd and 6 or 3rd and 8. And they give him the ball and he just goes and gets it. And then he like hobbles off the field like he can barely move. It was like, man, that dude, that's a great point that like, it can be cold, it can be windy, the passing game might not be there. Like, if you have Brandon Ayuk is probably less likely to succeed in that scenario than Debo, because you can just like give him a carry or give him a bubble screen and just say go, and that sort of negates the weather you might be dealing with.
Totally. And like, there's a decent chance that they could end up with home. It's way too early to talk about that sort of stuff, but there's also a very good chance they're going to have to go to Philly. They're going to have to go to a place like that. And that's not a place where like you can count on having the conditions to throw it down. Like it could be 30-mile-per-hour winds and snowy, And so players, McCaffrey also dials up on this. Kittle dials up on this. Like it's cliche, but there's a reason, teams who tend to have guys who are more physical and maybe less like flash down the field tend to play better in the playoffs. Yeah. It's not a 1-for-1. Talent's talent. You get a guy in the right situation. Like, yes, you get in a playoff situation, Jamar Chase can go 1-on-1 with guys, like he's gonna fucking win, But it is useful to have guys who can kind of battle through situations that are less than ideal.
Yeah. So we've spent this whole time talking about the Niners offense. The Giants had just 150 yards on the game. And it never felt like, even when it was close early on and they had that opening field goal drive, it never really felt like the Giants were going to do anything. Even coming into the game, it was one of those where it's like, you see that they're missing their left tackle, their starting left guard. Nick Bosa hasn't gotten on the board yet with any sacks this season. It's like, this is probably going to go bad for the Giants. And it did pretty predictably. I don't have like any super insightful analysis on what happened in terms of like the Niners, other than the Niners just like handling business and being like a dominant defense against a pretty bad offense when it's healthy and an even worse offense when they're banged up. Was there anything that happened for the 49ers defensively that stood out to you, aside from Dre Greenlaw getting his 1 per game personal foul tackle late there?
No, I mean, for me, what's interesting is, okay, so they had 2 sacks, a bunch of pressure on the quarterback. At no point was I worried that the Giants were going to do anything of substance, right?
Yeah. No Saquon. I didn't mention that either.
Yeah, and they were missing, was it 2 offensive linemen? I'm sorry. I
can't remember. They're starting left side. Andrew Thomas, who was a good player. He was top 5 pick a couple years ago, I think.
I mean, honestly, like I feel like the Niners defense did what they did, but at best I can give them a B performance relative to their expectations. That's kind of where I'm at with them. And I don't even know that it's a problem, if I would be honest with you. Like,
yeah, it's Thursday night. It's hard to like.
I don't particularly need the Giants defense peaking September 21st. I'm waiting for the the Bosa, Armstead, like Hargraves performance where it's like, oh, they made life absolute hell for the opposing quarterback, and we haven't got that yet. But what do you complain about them, right? Like
No, there's nothing. I don't think there's anything worth complaining about,
it
really.
does
Like
feel.
maybe the penalties.
Yeah. Do you feel like they're pacing themselves a little bit here? Because to me, like they have, like I think their defense is still probably better than their offense, like top to bottom in general. And maybe I'm wrong on that front, but it does feel like they turn it up a little more when they need to. Like the Rams game was probably a better tell of that than this one.
Yeah.
I'm waiting, and maybe that's fine. Like it's a long season. You don't need to kill yourself in September type of stuff. It does feel like maybe a couple of years ago they would have gone a little more aggressively all out, and now this is a more veteran team who's like, I need to make sure I get out of this game healthy, and we're gonna win no matter what, so I don't need to do that right now.
Yeah, they've always been sort of the defense that's predicated on like, okay, you can dink and dunk on us all you want, but you're not going to put together a 15-play scoring drive on us. And I think that's sort of been schematically what's been happening, at least in these last two games, right? Like teams just trying to get the ball out quick to negate that pass rush.
Sure.
And the Niners are just sort of, saying, all right, if you want a 4-yard completion, go ahead. You can have those all day, but we're just not going to get beat. And if you do try to go deep, our pass rush is probably going to get there before you can even try. I think Bosa is probably still rounding into shape. I think it was pretty clear given the holdout that he wasn't going to come in and just like be able to light the world on fire like he did throughout all of last season without any training camp reps. And I would guess probably starting in their next game against Arizona that it starts to look like defensive player of the year Nick Bosa again, because he's got 3 games under his belt. He'll have the extended break with a few extra days off with the Thursday night game. And then I think you start to see the defense really take off.
Yeah.
Javon Hargrave's been really good, I think. He had a sack today. I'm not worried at all about the Niners defense. I mean, they're mostly healthy. We haven't seen one of my concerns was is Tayshaun Gibson going to be ever going to be a liability for them, given his age and given that he was just a free agent they basically brought in off the street last August. He's just still playing solid, so it's like, all right, maybe pass rush depth is a concern, but I don't know. Like, I think that's the ultimate nitpicking is like, what's wrong with the 49ers defense? They just allowed 150 yards. Like I don't have anything to complain about.
And I hate to look ahead, but doesn't it feel like we just need to get to the Cowboys game in 2 weeks?
Yes.
Because to your point, every critique of this team is a nitpick. Like, oh, Brock wasn't as accurate as I wanted. They won by 3 scores. Like, right. Oh, the defense wasn't putting as much pressure on them as I wanted. 150 total yards. Right. And they are one of the 5 best teams in the league. No one's going to debate that. They're one of the few legitimate Super Bowl contenders, one of the 5 or 6 best teams. I want to see them go up against, and I don't even know if I buy the Cowboys are that good, but they are objectively in that conversation. Yeah. I want to see them go up against a team like that so I can actually make a determination if I'm worried about the defense, if I'm worried about Brock, if any of those things are real, or if they're going to ride like a 15-2 type of season. I need to see them play one of those teams, because the Steelers, I think we spent all off season be like, in Pittsburgh, it's going to be tough. And then the Rams are clearly in transition, and I don't know what you call the Giants at this point, but same thing. Like, these are all teams who are at best case fighting for like last wildcard spots.
Yeah. So coming up, they have Arizona next week, which might be, I don't think it's going to be a trap game to where the Cardinals will even make it competitive, but it might be a trap game to where like the Niners play bad for a quarter and a half,
which again won't necessarily tell us anything. It's more just annoying.
They do have, they're going up against arguably the worst team in the NFL with one of the best teams awaiting the week after in the Cowboys. Then they have an interesting stretch. They go to Cleveland, to Minnesota on a Monday night game, and then home to Cincinnati. And who knows what Cincinnati will look like at that point. They could either be like completely done and Joe Burrow's calf injury is just preventing him from doing anything, or Cleveland wins a couple by then and looks like a Super Bowl contender again. It's, this Cardinals game isn't going to teach us anything. We're going to learn a ton about them and against Dallas. I think that's ultimately going to be like the Brock Purdy referendum game, right? Because like I think objectively you could say Brock Purdy outplayed Dak Prescott in the playoffs last year.
Yeah,
not by like a whole lot, but like he didn't throw picks. That was really Dak's biggest issue in that game. But there's going to be the referendum game on Purdy against Dallas. And then how they move forward at Cleveland. I think Cleveland's defense is good. Deshaun Watson's obviously been terrible so far, but that's a separate discussion. And then at Minnesota, probably a pretty winnable game, I would guess, even though that's going to be a good environment in Minneapolis. But
the pregame hug that Kyle gives Kirk Cousins is going to be one, man.
Did you hear that? I think Jay Gruden went on one of the Bay Area radio stations. We haven't talked about this on the pod. We probably should have. But he said that Kyle Shanahan offered the number 2 pick in 2017 for Kirk Cousins to Washington, and Dan Snyder turned it down because he just doesn't like the Shanahans.
Bitter over the way the whole thing. I mean, that feels like a story where everyone's a loser, right?
So you don't think the 49ers have 2 Super Bowl wins by now with Kirk Cousins as their quarterback? Had they make that trade?
Was that the Solomon Thomas?
Yeah, that was the Solomon Thomas. And
I mean,
Reuben
he didn't
Foster
work out
draft
either. So
yeah.
I can't even imagine a world where, okay, so Kirk Cousins he's a good starter. Like he's a good player.
Yeah.
All criticism of him is in context of like the top quarterbacks, but he's better than Jimmy, right?
He's like the DeMar DeRozan of NFL quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's pretty accurate.
Like a star, like a notable, like reliable star player, but not someone you're like building a championship team around.
But him going to that Niner team who had none of these players, no Kittle, no Trent, no Debo. Like, what does that look like? Is he even alive? Like it's just it feels like a butterfly effect thing that I don't need to live through.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Like, given how Kirk Cousins has looked in primetime games as a whole, it's probably fair to say it would look pretty similar to what Jimmy Garoppolo looked like in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl and the NFC Championship game when he was playing. But that's a separate point. So I'll get you out here on this. We've talked about expectations or alluded to them throughout this episode. What are your expectations? Is this Super Bowl or bust for you? The way this roster, yeah.
What scenario does a nice NFC Championship game like render you? Like,
yeah,
I understand the context that like it's not Brock's fault that Jimmy didn't do X and Y, but this is very clearly a Super Bowl roster.
Yeah,
and it's been for 5 years, and this one's the best of them. Honestly, it just is. They didn't have McCaffrey or Trent in their first Super Bowl trip. Sorry.
Yeah.
And honestly, like guys like you, the only player on the Niners you could say was probably better in 2019 or 20 than they are today is George Kittle. Everyone else is a better player than they were now than they were back then. Like Debo's clearly gotten better. Fred Warner's got better. We can keep going down the line.
Nick Bosa.
Yes. Nick Bosa, although it's a freak in general. But yeah. I guess Eric Armstead's probably just about the same. Like I wouldn't say he's better or worse. They're in their window. This might be the best year they have with all those guys. I just don't know that there's any circumstance that's acceptable other than winning it all. Like, even if they run into injuries, you're going to walk away from it disappointed because you thought they could win it all, not for any other reason. So I don't know any other way to look at it. Like, I understand people putting everything under a magnifying glass because 3 championship games in 4 years. They've been to the Super Bowl, and this team's better than all of those. Like, it's kind of, are you going to get over the hump, or are you going to be one of those teams we look back on history like the Donovan Donovan McNabb Eagles, right?
Right. What's interesting to me about the Super Bowl discussion, and this is only 2 weeks of the season, so we're getting ahead of ourselves for sure.
Week three,
or week 3 for the Niners. But there are 7 undefeated teams in the NFC, and there are 2 undefeated teams in the AFC, the Dolphins and Ravens. And again, I'm not going to make any judgments about the Chiefs just yet. And Cleveland looks like they're in a bad way right now, starting 0-2, although they started 0-2 the year they went to the Super Bowl a couple years ago. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts that like maybe the AFC can be had this year? Because we came in thinking like, Buffalo, KC, Cincinnati would give the 49ers real issues in a Super Bowl.
I've been on record saying I think Niners and Eagles are kind of where the pressure is, but I will say the Cowboys, I don't know. I don't necessarily believe, but I can't rule it out because they're built similarly to both those teams where I'm just like, there's no weakness. They're tough on every level. Yeah. Their defense will travel. They got physical players all over the board. Maybe I just believe in Shanahan more than I believe in McCarthy. And
that's a major thing for me when it comes to the Cowboys. It's like, yeah, the Cowboys can look great in the regular season. We've seen Mike McCarthy teams look awesome in the regular season, and then just McCarthy things happen in the playoffs. Like,
yeah. So, but like, if I want to like ignore how I feel, I'll be like, yeah, I'll throw them in the conversation. I do think the NFC teams are top to bottom better, but I can't rule out the opportunity of a Mahomes Chiefs team figuring something out, or to your point, like Burrows and the Bengals figuring something out. So I don't know. That's a hedge. I guess I'm just giving you a hedge answer. That's where I'm at. Like personally, I'm always going to favor the style of football that like the Niners and Eagles play. Like I just personally like that more than, like, that's cute. You guys are physical everywhere. I'm just going to throw out 40 yards on the field. Right. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good place to end. The Niners are 3-0, a convincing win over the Giants, 30-12. Yeah, 30-12. They almost doubled the point spread, but it still feels like the offense left a lot of meat on the bone. But to your point, I think it's just a product of expectations. Sam Esfandiari, what do you got to plug? Talk about light years.
Yeah, come through. Listen to Light Years, Warriors pod, but we delve into the Niner topic, particularly when they're compelling like this. And, we can only talk so much. Dwight Howard, is he going to sign? Is he not? So,
God, I hope not. All right, come out to Cooperage Saturday, Cooperage Brewing in Santa Rosa. Kyle and I are doing a live show. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have Rod Brooks there from formerly of KMBR and currently on NBC Sports Bay Area pre and post. We love Rod. He's a good hang and super knowledgeable guy. Sam, thank you so much for doing this, man. We will have to drink some hazy IPAs and talk about the death of the mid-range J, or maybe the comeback of the mid-range J with Chris Paul now being back on the Warriors.
That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted. No, I appreciate you. It's a good time. We'll do it again. I'm having you on Light Years soon. So
yeah, looking forward to it. All right. Thanks everybody. Check out Cooperage Saturday again for our live event, and we will see you guys there.